Hello everyone and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. When it came to the rebuilding of the Second Temple, in the beginning delay was what could be described what was going on. Sure, the Jews had started rebuilding the temple, but when opposition came from the surrounding peoples, instead of trusting in God, the Jews abandoned the work of the temple, determining that God must not be willing that it be built at that time. They instead went to build their own houses. As a consequence of this, Haggai and Zechariah told them that God had withheld their blessings. These prophets spurred the people to start the building process again, but this time when they faced opposition, they continued on. Those opposing them this time simply wrote to Darius to ensure that the Jews did indeed have authority given from Cyrus to rebuild this temple. In today's reading, we'll get Darius' response. So if you have a Bible with you, turn to Ezra chapter 6. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 12. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Ezra chapter 6, beginning at verse 1. Then King Darius issued a decree, and search was made in the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. And Achmethea, in the palace that is in the province of Media, a scroll was found. And in it a record was written thus. In the first year of King Cyrus issued a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be rebuilt, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations of it be firmly laid, its height 60 cubits and its width 60 cubits, with 3 rows of heavy stones and 1 row of new timber. Let the expenses be paid from the king's treasury. Also, let the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple which is in Jerusalem, and brought to Babylon, be restored and taken back to the temple which is in Jerusalem, each to its place, and deposit them in the house of God. Now therefore, Tatnai, governor of the region beyond the river, and Shethar-Boznai, and your companions, the Persians who are beyond the river, keep yourselves far from there. Let the work of this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God on its site. Moreover, I issue a decree as to what you shall do for the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God. Let the cost be paid at the king's expense from taxes on the region beyond the river. This is to be given immediately to these men so that they are not hindered. And whatever they need, young bulls, rams, and lambs for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the request of the priests who are in Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet aroma to the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also I issue a decree that whoever alters this edict, let a timber be pulled from his house and erected, and let him be hanged on it, and let his house be made a refuse heap because of it. And may the God who causes his name to dwell there destroy any king or people who put their hand to alter it, or to destroy this house of God which is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, issue a decree. Let it be done diligently. Upon receiving their letter, unlike Smerdis, who seemingly didn't investigate to see if Cyrus had indeed given the Jews permission to rebuild the temple, Darius did. And what he found is what we covered in Ezra 1. Cyrus had given a decree, which we know was through the providence of God, for a remnant of the Jews to return home and rebuild the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. They were to begin worshiping there. Cyrus even went so far as to help pay for some of the expenses of the foundation of this temple, which we find was 60 cubits wide and 60 cubits wide and 60 cubits high, and he was to return the articles of this temple that Nebuchadnezzar had taken. Now here it must be said that it is highly likely that the temple's dimensions we have here in Ezra 6, which are given nowhere else in Scripture, are likely to be the result of a copyist error due to the fact that these dimensions would produce a temple size larger than Solomon's temple, which was 60 cubits long by 20 cubits wide and 30 cubits tall. And yet Ezra 3 made it clear that this temple would not be as grand as Solomon's, and yet if it was triple the width, then how could that really be said, even if it didn't have all the gold? Rather, because we're not given the length of the temple, what this likely read was that the temple was 60 cubits long by 20 cubits wide. However, it was taller at 60 cubits high. The tallness aspect wouldn't mean that the new temple was more grand, since it would have occupied the same footprint as Solomon's temple and not have all the gold on it. The reason we cannot know for sure is that in the 1st century BC, Herod made this temple much more grandiose than was being built here, and he made it much larger. Thus, Zerubbabel's temple was not exactly the one that Jesus stepped in, though the second temple would have been built by Zerubbabel and added onto by Herod. And seeing as how the Muslim Dome of the Rock sits on this site today, there is little chance that excavations of this site will ever happen, which might shed some light on the matter. So we'll just have to settle for not knowing for sure how big this temple was, except to know that it wasn't as grand as Solomon's or Herod's later temple was. Getting back to Ezra 6 now. Since Darius had confirmed the edict of Cyrus, he made an edict of his own. This temple was going to be rebuilt, and the work was not to be frustrated. In fact, Darius pronounced a curse on anyone who attempted to slow down this work, that the timber be pulled from his house and he be hanged on it. Darius even called on the name of God who dwells in this temple to destroy any people or king who tried to change the edict that Darius was issuing this day. That's how serious Darius took this. Now, from future studies of Esther and Daniel, we would know why this is true, which is that the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be altered, even by the king. That fact will form a major part of the events in Daniel and Esther, so let's remember that. Darius believed in this part about their laws, so he was determined that Cyrus's decree would be honored. And what's more, Darius decreed, if so, that anything that the Jews needed for burnt offerings to inaugurate this temple was to be provided, so that the God of heaven would bless the kings and his sons. We don't know whether or not Darius believed in the true God of heaven at all during his lifetime, but by the providence of God, he did carry out what Cyrus had decreed, and the temple would be rebuilt. We'll conclude chapter 6, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Ezra chapter 6, verses 13 to 22, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.